All right. What's up, Los Angeles? Welcome to Pod Save America. I'm John Favreau.
I'm Jamel Hill.
I'm John Lovett. I'm Tommy Vitor.
I'm Dan Pfeiffer.
Happy birthday to John Lovett.
Thank you.
This is what you always wanted for your birthday?
Attention.
Attention.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dan. I thought Lovett would get that.
Almost the amount I need to feel happy.
All right, let's get to the news. We are 6 months out from the Iowa caucuses, and the unofficial Labor Day kickoff of the presidential primary is right around the corner. This is a time when most voters start paying attention, start making up their minds. Here's where the race stands. Joe Biden remains the front runner, with Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders right behind him. Kamala Harris and Pete Buttigieg right behind them. Cory Booker and Beto O'Rourke right behind them. And another 3,000 or so candidates right behind them. So the race has been largely stable since it began, but we're heading into a fall that includes more campaigning, more television ads, a smaller debate stage, and news this week that the economy may be headed towards an economic downturn or a recession. Dan, you have some people saying it's early, anything can happen, and then you have other people who say, yeah, it's actually not that early. Which is closer to the truth about where this race is right now? How fluid is it? What does history tell us about, what we can know about a primary race at the end of August?
Which subjective judgment is true, Dan?
Yeah.
I thought that was a
Read
great
the tea leaves.
That was a great summary of American punditry right there.
Right, that's what I figured.
I mean, history says that we have a lot can happen in front of us, right?
Yeah.
At this point in 2008, the leaders in the polls in the Democratic primary was Hillary Clinton by 30 points, and in the Republican primary it was Rudy Giuliani by double digits. And so a lot
Giuliani ended up in greener pastures. Yeah.
Don't you boo him.
Yeah, Giuliani's in Kiev with a magnifying glass.
Just calling into Chris Cuomo repeatedly. So history suggests a lot can change. What I've been really struck by in this race is the point you made, which is that it has been incredibly stable.
Yeah.
The poll, with the exception of Elizabeth Warren eclipsing Bernie Sanders for second in the polls, the race has stayed. It's a lot of applause for second place. The polls have stayed basically the same since the beginning.
Yeah.
And there's very little undecided vote. So for this to change, the candidates, I think, who are at the bottom of the sort of the middle tier, the ones you mentioned, are going to have to get to work right now to change the dynamics of the race.
I mean, if you're a candidate who doesn't make the debate stage in September, where 9 candidates, I believe, have qualified so far, and there's another 2 or 3 on the edge, do you think that's it or what?
I mean, honestly?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's be honest.
Yeah,
That's
honestly,
it.
would be
It's just
ideal.
us here.
Lie to us, yeah.
Is anyone listening? Yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Tommy, you just spent a few days in Iowa. Which candidates are... cheer for Tommy in Iowa.
Near
Yeah.
Iowa.
Cheer for Tommy being in the state of
A
Iowa.
lot of your Instagram followers here tonight.
I'm learning a new medium.
Yeah, I thought that was a shout out for Iowa.
Right, yeah, that's a... Which candidates are impressing Iowans right now, and which candidates have sort of the most impressive organizations right now?
So I was there for like 4 days. I saw Bernie, de Blasio, Pete, Michael Bennett. I hung out with the staffs of Warren, Booker, and Beto. The things that I took away from my trip there was, one, like in 2016, you were either a Hillary person or a Bernie people, and there was no cross-pollination. It was ultimately like a turnout election, which is weird for the caucuses. This time, everyone's getting a look, and they're going to lots of events. Like I went to a house party hosted by undecided voters for the Booker campaign. Try to figure out if you would spend an hour of your life doing that on a Wednesday. But the thing that really stuck out to me was the degree to which the national news narrative was like critical this time around. Because when we were in Iowa in 2008, there was, George W. Bush was a thing of the past. You could bet on hope. You could be excited about your nominee. Now it's just existential dread about what's coming next. So everything they talk about is through the prism of electability. So I have to say, Warren's field staff was incredibly impressive. If you talk to people who sort of spend more time than I did there, they say that Cory Booker is actually building a good field team. You haven't seen it manifested in the polls yet, but they have some time. Mayor Pete had some huge crowds on a Tuesday at the State Fair. We walked around, we ate pork chops on a stick, we talked. But look, the story of Iowa is it can ultimately be wide open because of the need for retail politics, but it's just harder this time because you can have a candidate in your living room, but if you don't see them on Maddow the night before, maybe you're not thinking they have a chance.
Yeah. Jamel, you wrote a piece in June about how Trump has killed Democratic voters' sense of what's possible. And this is like what Tommy was talking about, this is about electability. What did you mean by that? And looking at the race today versus when you wrote the piece in June, do you think it's still true? Or?
No, I think it's definitely true. And I think Joe Biden, the fact that he's the front runner, speaks to that truth. And I feel like every time I talk about this electability issue, which is very annoying and it's a nuisance, that it is that people feel like I'm unnecessarily banging on Joe Biden. I'm not. But I think when you dig deeper and you talk to people about a lot of the reasons why they support him, it's not because he has the best ideas. It's not because he has the best policies. It's because they look at him as being an old white dude, and who better to beat another old white dude than an old white dude? So it's kind of...
You gotta fight fire with fire.
Exactly. You know what I mean? So to them, this is Captain America picking up Thor's hammer. Spoiler alert. Sorry. You should have seen the movie. But no, I mean, I think this is what's frustrating for me to watch, because I think that part of what can be very invigorating and exhilarating about the political process is energy, is new ideas, is, hearing, from different people and a thought process, a critical thinking process that happens. And I feel like that part of politics has been squelched. And there's been so much focus on how to beat Donald Trump that it has killed the sense of the possible, right? It's like if the reason you're not gonna vote for Elizabeth Warren or Kamala Harris or Pete Buttigieg or Cory Booker is because your only reason is, well, I don't think they can beat Trump, then Trump has already won, right? Because you're supposed to be voting for people who can help change and better the country, and if you're not doing that, you're part of the problem. And so that's why I wrote about, I don't like to give him credit for much, but unfortunately, I think that's what he's stolen from a lot of people.
Yeah.
I mean, there's something very real there, which it's the PTSD for Democrats of losing in 2016, which makes us play not to lose instead of play to win.
Right.
And that is, in sports and in politics, a terrible strategy.
I mean, Lovett, so the New York Times wrote a piece this week about Warren, about the electability thing again. If you're sitting in the Warren campaign, what do you do about sort of this electability thing that continues to hang out there?
Yeah, no, I think it's a good question, and I actually think it goes to what Jamel is saying, which is, yeah, you can make an electability argument. I actually believe she started to do that, and there was an argument she made in the last debate which went, you trust me on all these policy matters. Trust me when I say I can win. You think I'm smart. You think I know what I want to do as president. Trust me that I've thought this all the way through, and I think there's value to that, but really what we're talking about is pain, right? There's so much pain, and I think people are trepidatious about the field. I think they're nervous about who to pick because there's so much trauma from 2016, as Dan said, and I think speaking to electability is really speaking to that deeper sense of hurt that people feel, that they don't understand their country, they don't understand how someone like Trump could get close to the White House. And so we come back to that same question we've been talking about for months, which is who can speak to the fundamental fear and crisis of this moment that goes beyond just economics, that goes beyond just electability, that goes to what kind of country we're going to live in, what's going to happen to our democracy, what we're going to do to attack the political rot, the cultural rot, and the pain that people feel. And I think any candidate currently running in Iowa who finds a way to really make that their case will do better for it, whether they're trying to beat Joe Biden on electability or trying to, I don't know, eat a pork chop.
You know what's weird, funny about that is, like, ultimately every stump speech feels like a greatest hits album, right? Because you hear it so many times. But I saw Bernie at the fair, and it felt like a throwback album. It was like a TBT, right? Which is interesting because he's consistent, but I do wonder if people are, like, if you went and saw Chance and you only played Coloring Book, it'd be a good show, but you'd be like, the culture has moved on, like, where are the new hits? Groceries is fine, right? But like, what are you telling me about today? And like, I would worry if I were him a little bit.
Yeah.
I mean, I think there's an important.
You come along with Tommy on his analogies. You follow him wherever he goes.
If you don't like Chance, I can't help you.
I think it's just as a historical reminder is that at this point in 2007, no one thought Barack Obama was electable.
I was going to say, we had the same electability problem.
And the thing that changed that was winning the Iowa caucus. Winning elections.
Which is what Elizabeth Warren said this week, too.
Yes.
She's like, winning is the best way to alleviate
It's
concerns about
literally
electability.
the only way to define an indefinable term.
It's all
ridiculous.
bullshit until people actually vote.
Yeah, I will say, though, like, in 2007, people were worried about taking a risk on Barack Obama, and they thought that Hillary Clinton was the more electable candidate because she was more experienced. I think people in 2008 were a little bit more willing to take a risk because, like Tommy said, George W. Bush was not going to be president again, and so people had this sense of possibility. I do think, and you made a really great point in your piece, Jamel, which is, for a lot of voters, you talked about, especially African-American voters, like, they're going to be very pragmatic about this choice because Donald Trump winning a second term represents, a real existential threat to our country, to people's lives, and so I do think that, like, fear sort of pervades this electorate in a way that it hasn't in a long time.
Not just fear, but also dread. I think part of the reason, and this is what I mean about this stolen sense of optimism that is very disappointing to kind of witness, is, as you pointed out, if you believe, again, Elizabeth Warren has, and I'm just using her as an example, but if you believe these candidates really have good ideas, but it comes back to everybody thinking deep down in the places they don't want to talk about, oh, we'll never elect a woman. We'll never elect, another black president. We'll never, like, that is what is keeping people back. And I think even for probably one of the really sad things about, oppression and racism and all those other things is that you eventually adopt the mindset of the people who exercise those principles. Yeah. So Black people in many ways are, because Joe Biden carries, the largest Black support of any candidate, but part of the thinking of why that is the case is because they also have adopted this thinking that leadership, the only leadership that will be electable in this country is white leadership. Yeah. And that's kind of sad to see that being stolen from people, not being able to believe that we can have leadership that looks different in this country. If we did it, just literally a few years ago, why couldn't we do it again? Yeah. But that's just how deep-seated this pain really is.
And I also think it's worth remembering, too, that what electability is thinking to yourself, what will other people think? It's what is someone else going to do in that voting booth. It's saying, I want people to judge, I want Cory Booker, I want Kamala Harris, but after what I saw before, based on what I'm seeing now, I don't trust my fellow citizens anymore. I don't trust them anymore because of someone like Donald Trump getting close to the Oval Office. And I don't understand how you overcome that mistrust because in some ways it's legitimate. I mean, it's a legitimate fear. This is the most important presidential election in history.
The New York Times did a piece about these concerns about Elizabeth Warren, and someone quoted in the piece said, if it were up to me, I'd vote for Warren.
Well, it is up to you, right?
Hey, you're going to the fucking polling booth.
I know.
Well, so here's the good news about this. I think Warren and all the candidates, Warren, Kamala, every candidate who's not the front runner, who's not Joe Biden, have played it really well because they don't, with the exception of Bernie Sanders, who does talk about electability quite a bit, they don't actually talk about electability a lot, they just show it. And I think the best thing, the way to overcome electability is to show that you're electable and not tell. And there was polling this week that shows that 57% of Democrats are now saying that Warren can probably beat Trump, and that's up 14 points since June. And, Biden is still in the lead with 65%, but that number hasn't changed over the last couple of months, and Warren's is actually rising a little bit, and so she might be doing something right there. I do want to talk about Joe Biden. He's had a relatively light schedule in August, and some allies are reportedly advising his campaign to scale back his appearances in order to reduce his gaffes. Dan, is this smart?
Well,
Now the campaign says this is not true, we should say, but that's what was reported.
If there are people who are advising him to do that, they should not do that. And if those people advising him are telling the press they're advising him, those are bad advisors. But I think, to be fair to Joe Biden on 2 points, we have known Joe Biden a long time.
Yeah.
We have a lot of great personal affection for Joe Biden. We worked with him. The fact that he is making gaffes or making verbal misstatements is not something that is necessarily related to his age.
Right.
This has been part of his, and I'm not being mean about it. He is someone
That's
who,
funny, people will take that as a backhanded compliment, but it's a real one.
But
It's a real one.
that is something he has done for a long time. He has actually, for much of his career, turned that into a political strength as an example of his authenticity and that he speaks off the cuff and not off a teleprompter. But I think that his light schedule has more to do with the fact that his campaign is dependent on big money fundraisers than online fundraising, right? He has to leave Iowa to come to LA and San Francisco and New York to raise money because he does not have the grassroots fundraising base of all these other candidates. Like, there was a story in the New York Times which said his 5 best online fundraising days of this campaign were in his first week. So Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders and Kamala Harris, to a lesser extent, can stay in Iowa and New Hampshire and campaign because they can raise money online. He's got to leave to raise money the old-fashioned way.
Yeah,
I mean, he can't even repeat his own website right. So
Yeah.
But you know what?
That's going to make
that
makes online fundraising tough.
Here's the thing, though. Like, that's Joe Biden, right? And I think that his campaign has to make him as available as possible to the press, do as many events as possible. Like, the only way out is through for him. Like, I think he's got to be out there, and he's got to lean into the gas, right? This is me. I say things wrong a lot. I screw up. That's the thing. But, like, you know me. You love me. You know who I am. You know where my heart is. Like, I think he has to be... The more he sort of pulls back because he's worried about the gaffes, I think the worse it is for him. He's got
It's
to
the same thing with the age, right? The best politicians turn their weaknesses into strengths.
Right.
And his age is right now political weakness, but his experience could be a strength if he can bill it as both that experience is the best way to beat Trump and the best way to bring stability and security back to this country.
The age question is important because I don't think we all talk about it as openly and honestly as we might in the media, but I was sitting there across from a 70-year-old woman who was saying, well, I don't think that I should be president. I think someone younger than me should do it. And I do think that a lot of the questions about gaffes or misstatements or slowing down are proxies for this age question. You don't hear that about people who are just a few years younger than him, like
Or Bernie, who's older.
Bernie Sanders
Right.
or Warren, who does not seem like someone who's 70 years old by any stretch.
Well, I think it comes down to, does he seem too old? That's what we're talking about.
Right.
Does he seem too old to be president? And the thing is, it's not just about winning the primary, and I don't know, maybe you can win the primary by scaling back events and by trying to minimize gaps by doing less things, but I don't think, well, whatever the case is, the point is not to win the primary, the point is to win the presidency. And Donald Trump is a fearsome adversary. He's going to stand in front of a microphone in front of his audience of fellow Americans for 2 hours, and he is going to ramble inconsistently and incoherently, and he is going to make lots of vicious negative attacks that are going to blanket across the news. He's going to feed off of that energy, and he's going to do it every day, and he's going to sit on top of an incredibly sophisticated political organization backed by billionaires in the Republican National Committee. Like that is going to require somebody who is going to be able to, and the Russians, as if this part of the game wasn't hard enough, and we're going to need somebody who's able to go toe-to-toe with that person every single day, ready to fight him every single day. And so if Biden wants this story to go away, he needs to campaign hard every single day, and he'll have to do it no matter what.
I will just say, Lovett, that what you just said is the reason for all of us not to completely throw away the idea of electability. Because what you just did is you made an electability argument against Joe Biden.
Of course.
And I'm just saying, like, there has become a thing like we shouldn't talk about electability. No, the problem is that it's hard to judge electability.
But we're
right?
not talking about
And it's
electability.
Right, exactly.
But I'm not saying here. I'm saying these things because I'm talking about what a candidate will or will not do on the campaign trail and what that candidate will face. I'm not trying to put myself in the heads of a swing voter because that's
saying
hard
who could actually be on stage next to Donald Trump.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the important part of that is you can make a decision, a theory of the case about what the best candidate qualities are to take on Trump. But to do that, you have to widen the aperture, because the problem with electability is you put it yourself in the minds of people, and all the pundits put themselves in the minds of white people in the Midwest.
Yeah.
And we don't ever ask the question in the terms of younger voters or voters of color or non-voters all over this country.
Or, I don't know, there are black people who actually lived in the Midwest.
Right.
You know, like, that is actually a
Right.
thing. You know, who knew? I will say this, though. I do think part of, if I may make a sports analogy
Please
here.
do, please.
Please don't.
Please don't.
Lovitts are stale.
Look. So Joe Biden feels a little bit like what has happened in college basketball when you have a player, unlike the rest of them, that, like, you know, the really good players leave after 1 year, one and dones, right? But if you're a senior or you're a junior, you give them more time to pick apart your game. And unfortunately, Joe Biden has been in politics, you know, since the horse and buggy. And so because of that, he was unfortunately a politician during some times where there was racial segregation. There was issues that look much differently now than they did then. And he's on the record for some stuff. And these gaffes would be way easy to minimize if Joe Biden just learned 2 words, I'm sorry.
Agreed.
That's
Yeah.
all he
No,
has to do. Like, we realize that it was a different time, that most of us are smart enough to understand that part of it, but he is still doubling down on dumb things, and that's what's getting him in trouble. It's not the age, okay, because, again, he's in a race with Bernie Sanders. I mean, Donald Trump's 3,000 years old. I mean, it's not that part of it that should actually work for you. It's just his lack of accountability for when he was, for earlier in his year as a politician, that to me is really undercutting him in this primary season.
Okay, we will be back with more news right after a game.